You're on a plane, flying at 36,000 feet. You're sitting back, you're reading a book, watching a movie, sipping a drink. When suddenly the plane drops 10,000 feet and you look out and there's an engine on fire. You're in a panic and you think, I'm going to die. That's what it's like when you get a serious illness diagnosis. When the doctor says, it's cancer. The test shows that it's ALS. You have dementia. And while it feels like you're going to die, it turns out there's a lot we can do to right the plane and get it to fly smoothly. Now, it's true, you won't be able to sit back and read your book. You're going to have to become the co-pilot. And the plane may not stay aloft quite as long, and the destination may differ. But no matter how serious the medical news, you can usually get your life and the plane back in control. Even in the midst of chaos, there is hope. Over the past 27 years, I've cared for thousands of people who've received just this kind of really bad news. And I have learned that we can live well with Parkinson's disease, chronic lung disease, heart failure, if we can find the courage to face reality and engage in the simple, loving, and caring act of talking about hope. And I don't just mean hope for a cure, that most deep, sincere, and heartfelt hope. That is a hope that I share and one that I wish were always possible. What I mean are all of the hopes that can coexist with the hope for a cure. The achievable hopes, what I like to call realistic hope or true hope that can be the path to a good life in the face of serious illness. Now, it turns out when we talk about serious illness, there's good news as well as bad news. Well, good news first. The good news is that there's never been a better time to be alive if what you want is to be alive. Which is to say that after being flat for all of human history, human lifespan has increased dramatically over the last 100 years. In the year 1900, we lived on average to be age 50, 50. And today we live on average to near age 80. That's tremendous. That's the good news. So what's the bad news? Well, the bad news is that over this exact same period of time, the death rate has remained remarkably stable at 100%. Now, of course, you didn't need me to tell you that. But what's less obvious is that while it is true that on average we will live longer, it is also true that we are likely to live some of that time, years or decades, with serious illness. And when that happens, it's like the plane is plummeting to the ground. The tendency for people with serious illness, their loved ones, even doctors and nurses, is to turn away from what's really going on because it's just too sad or difficult to face. We have to do better for each other. Instead of turning away, we have to find the courage to face reality, no matter how sad or difficult the situation. Because people with serious illness, they know what's going on. I mean, just last week, I met Grace, 61-year-old woman with very advanced lung cancer. As I was about to go into Grace's room, her daughter stopped me. And she said, "Whatever you do, don't tell my mom she has cancer." And I could feel the love and the caring that motivated that request. And then I thought, well, what does your mom think she has? I mean, she's been coming to the UCSF Cancer Center for the last 3 years. And there's this huge sign on the outside of the building that says Cancer Center. And she reads. When you have a serious illness, you know what's going on. When you get weaker, you know. When your family gathers from the four corners of the earth, you know. Now I get it. It's out of love and caring that we turn away from reality. We don't want to make the person we care about sad or take away hope. And I understand the worry that talking about what's really going on will destroy hope. But in my experience, it doesn't work that way. Because hope is an essential, fundamental part of the human experience. Hope is powerful and durable and persistent, even in the darkest of times. Hope is a positive emotion, like joy and awe and gratitude and love. It makes us feel better. Hope is the antidote to sorrow and despair. And so, if we want to express true love and caring, we have to find the courage to talk about what's really going on and the courage to talk about hope. Because courage means doing what is hard, even when we're afraid. In fact, we can't really have courage or don't really need it unless we are afraid. And it's precisely in those moments as the plane is hurtling to the ground and we're afraid of dying, afraid of loss, afraid of the future, that we need to find the courage to face reality and to talk about hope with kindness and compassion and empathy and with love. One of the challenges we have is that we in healthcare often make it worse when we lack the courage to see what's going on. Helen was an 86-year-old woman with very advanced dementia. She was living at home with her daughter, receiving hospice care. One morning, Helen's daughter walks in and finds Helen breathing just 4 times a minute. She was moaning quietly. Helen was dying. Helen's daughter panicked, and as sometimes happens, instead of calling hospice, she called 911. And the paramedics came and whisked Helen off to the emergency room. When Helen's daughter arrived in the emergency room doctor pulled her aside, and he asked her this question: "Would you like us to do everything possible for your mom?" Now, what do you think Helen's daughter said? Yes, of course. I mean, can you imagine? You bring your mom to the emergency room, and the doctor asks, "Would you like us to do everything possible for your mom?" And you say, "You know, for my mom, half would be plenty. You know, don't knock yourself out. She's a quitter." It's just a terrible question, because there's only one answer that may not be the right answer. So of course Helen's daughter said yes. And so the emergency room doctor calls the intensive care unit team and the medical team to come and admit Helen to the hospital. They're going to put a big IV in her neck, a tube down her throat, they're going to draw blood, take x-rays, give antibiotics. Turned out that one of our palliative care doctors happened to be on call for the medical team. He heard the story, and he immediately raced down to the emergency room. He beat the ICU team, because sometimes in our business, you have to be fast. He could immediately see what was going on. He pulled Helen's daughter aside, and he said, "Your mom is very sick." And Helen's daughter said, "Yes, we know." And then he asked her this question: "How were you hoping we could help?" And Helen's daughter held up a shopping bag. She said, "We brought new clothes. We want to dress her in new clothes for her journey to the next life." And the doctor said, "Well, that's really important. We should do that right here in the emergency room. And we'll give her some medicine to make her more comfortable, and then we'll move her upstairs to a quiet room where all of you can be with her." And Helen's daughter said, "Yes, thank you." And that's what happened. Because we had the courage to see what was really going on, to name it, and to ask the right question about hope. Now, it may seem counterintuitive, but so much of my work as a palliative care physician is talking about hope. So what is palliative care? Palliative care is specialized medical care focused on improving quality of life for people with serious illness. And you can learn everything you need to know about palliative care from just one study. In this study, they enrolled 151 people with metastatic lung cancer. which is a serious illness. At the time that this study was done, more than 10 years ago, people with this illness lived on average for 9 months with treatment. All the people in the study received state-of-the-art chemotherapy. And then half the people were randomly assigned to receive palliative care in addition and alongside the chemotherapy. So what did they find? They found that everything good we want to have happen to people. They had less pain, they had less shortness of breath, they had less depression, they had a better quality of life, happened to the people who received palliative care in addition to and alongside chemotherapy. And the people who received palliative care lived longer, on average by 3 months, a year versus 9 months for people who received chemotherapy alone. I like to say that if palliative care were a drug, everyone would get it. And if you'd invented that drug, you'd be a billionaire. Fortunately, today, we have treatments for lung cancer and many other illnesses that help people live longer and better. And new treatments are on the horizon. But the basic findings of the study remain the same. Palliative care helps people with serious illness live better. If you or a loved one has a serious illness, you should make sure that you get palliative care. And don't take no for an answer. And if anybody tells you you're not ready, insist. Palliative care is right for people with any serious illness, alongside and in addition to any other treatment for your illness. Helping people with serious illness live as well as possible for as long as possible, that's actually what I say, is why I got into this field. And for the longest time, I would have told you that my personal experience had no impact on my work. You see, when I was 28 years old, my father died suddenly of a heart attack at age 54 on Valentine's Day. And for many years after that, I couldn't see how that experience had any influence on my work. I mean, how could it? My father died suddenly, and he had no opportunity to receive palliative care. I was sharing this idea with a friend of mine who's also a palliative care doctor. And she said, "Oh, Steve, I think it has everything to do with your work. I mean, it's true, your father died suddenly and he had no chance to get palliative care. But for people who have the knowledge of serious illness, who have the time, you want to make sure that they make the most of that time. That's why you're in this field." And I have learned that the way to make the most of our time is by talking about hope. In fact, talking about hope is so valuable that I call it the golden question. When you think about the future, what do you hope for? It's incredibly simple and reveals so much. Mary was a 72-year-old woman with interstitial lung disease, which is a progressive, incurable scarring of the lungs. This illness inevitably leads to shortness of breath and death within just a few years. Mary got admitted to the hospital with a pneumonia that had worsened her breathing and from which her lungs could not recover. She needed such high levels of oxygen that we could only provide it in the ICU. One morning on rounds, I looked at my team, and I looked at the ICU team, and I said, we need to go in there and ask Mary about what she hopes for. And the ICU doctor looked at me like I was crazy. And he said, "Steve, have you seen her? Have you seen how sick she is? There is no hope." So we walked in, and I said, "Mary, when you look to the future, what do you hope for?" And Mary said, "I hope to see my daughter get married." I said, "Wow, that's really important. Tell us about that." And her eyes lit up, and she said, "It's in 10 months in the Napa Valley." And I immediately thought, I just don't see it. I mean, I don't see any way that Mary will be alive in 10 months, and even if she was, I didn't see any way that she could get out of the ICU. And so we talked about it honestly with Mary and her daughter. And her daughter said, well, that's really important to me too. I'll just get married right here in the ICU. And sure enough, 3 days later, Mary's daughter came to the ICU in this beautiful white wedding gown. Her fiancé had on a tuxedo. They put a corsage on Mary's hospital gown. Our palliative care chaplain officiated. There was family, friends, nurses, doctors, respiratory therapists. Not a dry eye in the ICU. And it was beautiful. Mary got to achieve the thing she most hoped for. Because we not only had the courage to ask about hope, but when Mary told us what was most important, we had the courage to say, if that's what's important, we have to do that now. Because it's easy in that situation to say, oh, I hope so too. And what would Mary think? She would think she's going to make it, when I think the exact opposite. And I would submit to you that if Mary thinks she's going to make it, and I think she's not going to make it, then what she has is not true hope, but false hope. And in the end, false hope is no hope, because it's not based in reality. And you might wonder, oh, what's the harm of a little false hope? I mean, let her believe that she's going to make it. The harm is that we squander our time, that we pursue and accept treatments that are more likely to hurt than help, and most importantly, that we miss the opportunity to achieve what is possible. We have to be in the realistic hope business, the true hope business. Because while we may not be able to achieve all of our hopes in the face of serious illness, there are many hopes that we can achieve. Finish a degree, visit our hometown, write a book, make a quilt for our as yet to be born grandchild, and know that we can experience joy and awe and gratitude and love. And when the time comes, we can hope to land the plane gently. Too often in medicine, we ignore the fact that every plane must land, that every life must end. We think we can just fly the plane around and around, and the fuel gauge is going down, and we're just flying the plane. And then one engine goes out, and we're still flying the plane until we're out of fuel, and the plane crashes and burns on the ground. How much better to savor the flight, and as the fuel gauge goes down, to land the plane gently. How can we do that, even in the face of serious illness? By having the courage to face reality and the courage to talk about hope, all our hopes. Because at any time in our lives, we have to remember that it's our hope that makes us who we are. Our hope that reminds us of what's most important, and that hope never dies. Thank you.